This is going to be a quick tutorial on how to do quick body turns and head turns. So this is not a slow head turn or slow body turn. It's a quick one, and actually what I've discovered is that those can work very effectively for animation. The key is that you want to be moving the character as you do the turn. But I found these to be very effective, and I'm going to show you how to create them right now. But I'm going to create them with a new character so that I haven't yet done those bones yet. Okay, so I'm going to add a body turn and a head turn for this Liz character. Liz comes with Anime Studio Pro, but I'm refactoring her. I'm modifying the rig so that it uses the latest techniques and has a lot more control. Now I'm going to start with the body turn to show you kind of a technique that you need for the body turn. Now for the body turn, and the easiest way to do that is to flip the root bone. But I also want my bones connected to this character, so as I move the character around, the bones will move, the control bones will move with it. But if I do that, when I flip this root bone, all the control bones will move around. Now for the control bones for the head, I'm not too concerned about that. That's okay by me. But when I add the body control bone, I don't want that moving. So we're going to use a technique that I'll show you. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on the grid with Control G. And you can also, in the view, change the grid settings or enable the grid. So that's another way you can do it. And just make sure that you've got fairly small grid so that you can put the bone where you want. And so that's good enough for me. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bone creation tool, and then I'm going to press Alt and click on the root bone. And so I'm going to create another tiny little bone that's parented to the root bone. So I'm going to go, and it's important that it goes horizontally, so I'm just going to click someplace on the grid, and I'm going to drag a little bit to the right, and I have a little tiny root bone that I've added here. Control bone there. Now later on I'm going to make this invisible, but you'll see its value later. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to set the bone constraints for that. I want to turn on the angle constraints and set them both to 0. That's very important because you're going to be creating a bone chain from the root to the body turn bone. And if I don't set this to 0, when I move the body bone, it will tend to move this bone. So I have to set the constraints to 0. Now the other thing to notice is that I've put this bone in a place that it's kind of out of the way once the body gets flipped. And specifically this root bone, when this root bone flips, I want this kind of thing out of the way, because this is going to move, and then I've got to pull it back, and I don't want it to be in the way of anything for Liz. It may be a little bit in the way of this hand. I'm not too worried about that, but you put it in some place where it's kind of out of the way. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Add Bone tool again, and make sure that the control bone here, the new bone that we just added, is highlighted. And I'm just going to put the body control bone, body turn control bone somewhere out of the way, and I'm pressing Shift, and there's my body turn bone. Okay, and I'm going to press Control G to turn off the grid. I don't need it right now. And I'm going to click on the parenting just to be sure that this body turn bone is connected to this control bone, which connects to the root bone. Now we're going to turn this body turn bone. We're going to give it that name, body turn. And we're going to go to bone and say make smart bone dial. So we only need the bone to move in one direction. And in Anime Studio Pro, positive angles are counterclockwise. So I'm going to set the minimum angle to 0 and the maximum angle to 45 and the duration to 24 frames and click OK. Now, in Anime Studio, this bone can jump around. If you've got parented smart bone dials, there's a bug, and sometimes it just will jump around, and we'll fix that if it happens. But if you don't know about that, you might want to see my other tutorial about that. But we're going to click on OK, and in this case, it didn't jump around. So I'm going to bring this up. Now you see it jumped. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. Sorry that everything gets so crowded. But what I'm going to do now is move that body turn bone back somewhere. It doesn't have to be, on a grid. I'm just going to move it somewhere out of the way where I want it to be. I personally am going to go ahead and set these to smooth, because what it does when it places keyframes in the timeline when you're actually using it will use those. So I'm just going to use it to be smooth. Sometimes you want linear, but in this case smooth works fine. Okay, so I zoomed out a little bit, and the first thing I'm just going to check that the bone moves as we expect. Alright, so now I'm ready to do the keyframes for the body turn. Now it's very important to notice what's going to happen is you want this turn to happen quickly. So what we're going to do is I'm going to want it to turn right in the middle of the frames, and just before that I want to lock down the current position so that it changes immediately. That way I can use smooth keyframes. So now your rig may be different, but in this rig what's going to happen when we turn this, when I turn this body bone, this root bone here, these target bones at the feet are going to stay in place, and so the legs are going to get tangled up a little bit, and this body turn bone is going to flip over to the side and everything. So what we want to do is lock a certain number of bones. Now I'm going to show you which bones I'm going to lock here and what I'm going to do, but your rig may be a little different. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me make this window a little bit smaller. Okay, kind of get it out the way a little bit, and I'm going to select the root bone, and that root bone is going to flip. So I'm going to click the flip end to end once and twice, flip it back, so you can kind of see what happens. And so that's what this extra control bone is about, is fixing all of these things. And specifically this extra control bone allows this body turn bone not to flip way over there. So in any case, I get it so that, again, right before the middle, the frame before the middle, I've set a keyframe for the end flip. I also want to set a keyframe for the position, and sometimes angle could change. It shouldn't in this case because the root bone should be perfectly horizontal, and the angle shouldn't change. But in just case you need to, you can go ahead and click the angle so that all of that is set. I don't need to do anything with the body turn bone, but what I do need to do is for this tiny little root bone, I need to do the same kind of thing, and I'm going to flip it twice so that I've got a keyframe that leaves it where it was. And again, it's going to move as well. Its position is going to move, and potentially its angle could move, so I'm going to set the angle as well. The next thing I want to do is set the position of the target bones just by clicking on the dots. I also want to set the angle of those target bones because they're going to change. And I also want to set the angle of the feet. So I don't need to do both bones because I just need the one that's right at the ankle. So those are the bones that I need to kind of lock before I do the body turn with my rig. You'll need to figure out for yours if your rig is different, but if you've got these target bones, you definitely need to do that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is advance one frame to frame 12. And now I'm going to select that root bone and flip it end to end. And there we go. It's flipped, but everything looks kind of messed up. But that's what we're going to fix right now. Okay, so to fix things, the first thing I'm going to do is select this little control bone here, this special bone, and I'm going to flip it end to end. Okay, so the body bone's getting better, but not quite right. And I'm going to drag its position, the control bone's position, a little bit. And to get it in exactly the right place, I'm going to turn the grid back on with Control G. And what I will do is I will go back to frame 11 and see where it was. Okay, so it's over there. And then 12. So now I'm going to drag over and see if I got it quite right. I'm not quite sure. And I just go back and forth. Okay, so I was one cell up. Okay, so there we go. So now we can see that that bone is what's allowed this body turn bone not to really move very much. It might move a little tiny bit, but not much at all. And so now that's what that bone was all about. So I'm going to turn off the grid. Now, as a quick aside, something else I want to show you. Let me zoom out a little bit here. And I'm going to show the bone parenting. And if you'll notice, I've got all of these bones parented to the head bone. And that's the way that I used to do things. But once I discovered this technique of this extra control bone, I'm starting to tie all of these bone dials to this one. And that allows me to move them all as a unit, and just as neater, and it allows, like when I move the head, it doesn't move these all around. So that's something that you may want to think about. Now, I'm not going to reparent these, because whenever you reparent, it changes all your smart bone controls. So right now I'm just going to leave those as they are. Okay, so now let's change the feet and fix that. So to fix that, I'm going to turn on onion skins. And notice here that I always select the wrong one. I have outlines only on, draw behind is off, that's very important, and selected layer only, and I don't use relative frames. I'm going to turn off the frames that I don't need, and I'm just going to turn on the frame 11. That's the one that I'm interested in. Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that I want the root bone to move over a little bit. So I'm going to point at the root bone with the Transform Bone tool, and I'm going to press Alt. That makes sure that the root bone does not rotate or scale or anything. It's just going to move. And so I'm going to move it so that the waist is where I want it to be. And I'm going to, as I look at the outline, I'm going to balance it so that it looks pretty much where she was before. So I kind of look at the waist or the shoulders or the head and all those kinds of things and pick what I think seems to be the least amount of movement. Now, I'm not going to try to get all the arms and the head position and everything else the same, because that's how you would do that in the actual animation, because in the animation her arms aren't just going to be standing out to the side like that. I'm mainly just trying to get that root bone in the right place. That's all I need to do. Okay, now I'm going to go to the feet. And in the feet, again, I'm making sure that I'm on frame 12. And the first thing that I'm going to do is drag the target bones. So I'm going to press Alt and drag one foot over and drag the other foot over. And I'm kind of getting them out of the way a little bit. And now I'm going to rotate that foot bone. Oops. Now, as you see, as I try to rotate that foot bone, it's not moving. What's happening is the bone constraints. So I actually use very few bone constraints because they get into trouble sometimes when you're doing animation. So I'm going to go into the constraints and turn off those angle constraints there, and there you go. I'm going to close that so I can see the other one. Same thing for that one. I'm going to turn off the angle constraints there. Okay, so now they're really in crazy positions, but that's what's great about this. I can just, put them back where they should be. Let me get that bone if I can zoom in. Let me just move the target one out the way for right now. Try to get that zoom in here. and rotate that foot. Okay, and now I can rotate the target bone like I want. Okay, and rotate this target bone like I want. And now I'm just going to, again, press Alt and move the target bone. So basically the heels are in the correct place. Now, since the person is rotated, I have to make a decision about what I personally want to do. Do I actually try to get the feet right exactly where they were, or, you know, because one foot is a little bit lower than the other, so I just make adjustments what I think looks artistically good. Now let me zoom out, and I'm going to turn off the onion skins and just going to scrub across the line, and we see there's the body turn. Now if you haven't animated with a quick turn like this, you know, we look at this and that's a rather drastic turn. But really when you're animating, if you're using things like stretch and squash and anticipation and movement on arcs and all the principles of animation, you can actually, and you want to match the character's position right before and right after, you can actually make the turn very nice looking. Okay, so now I'm going to go out to the main timeline again, and I'm now going to put in a head turn bone. And again, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, which is select this bone. I'm going to parent the head bone to that control bone again. And it doesn't matter exactly where this is. I'm going to select the Add Bone tool and press Shift so that the bone just goes straight up. And now I'm going to select Bone, make Smart Bone Dial, and call it Head Bone, Head Turn. Again, this positive angles, and her head, I want her head to be turning to the left, so I want the bone to go to the left to make it a little bit easier. It'll get switched if the body turns, but at least in the standard position I want it to look right. So I'm going to go 0 to 45, and again I'm just going to use 24 frames. You don't have to use 24, but that's what I'm going to do. And I select OK. Again, I'm going to set these to smooth, doesn't matter. Just my personal taste. And I'm going to drag, make sure that the bone's working. And we're going to do the same thing that we did before, which is just before frame 12, what I'm going to do is set the position of the head. Now in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to flip this head bone just like we did the root bone, but instead of flipping it end to end, we're going to flip it side. And so as we do that, its position and its angle could change. Now in this particular case, this bone is almost straight up and down, so it's probably not going to change much, but you could have the head bone might be off at an angle, or her head, when she turns, it may not line up with the neck well. So on frame 11, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the position, so I lock in the position for that bone, and I'm going to click in the middle for rotation to lock in the rotation. I don't need to really do the angle flip, I don't think. So go to 12, and now that's where I'm going to flip side. Okay, so, and that's where I was saying, see, the angle and the position could be off. And so I'm just going to do what I did before, turn on the onion skins, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to match the position and the angle to what looks artistically right. I don't necessarily, remember, this isn't gonna, the head bone is, I mean the head is turning, so it will change a little bit, so I just choose what I think looks best in that turn. Okay, now it's also possible that the neck may change, so you may want to, in this head turn, you may want to go to wherever your neck points are, and you may want to move those. I don't think that I need to in this particular case, but that's another thing that you might want to do. So I'm going to go back out to the main timeline, and go to the bone layer, turn off the onion skins, and test out my head turn. Oh, yeah. So it doesn't seem to be working. And guess what? Neither does the body turn. Oh no, what's wrong? Well, those things don't work the way you expect at frame 0. So to test it, all you have to do is go to a frame other than frame 0. And now, as I go and turn them, they'll work the way I expect. So I can do the body turn and then the head turn. Notice since the body is turned, the head angle kind of goes in the opposite direction. But there you go, your body and your head turn.